The massive alien ship appeared above Earth on a regular Tuesday morning. It hung there in space like a giant metal crescent that stretched for miles. The hull was dark gray with strange red symbols glowing across its surface. Inside the United Earth Defense Station, Admiral Kyle Harrison watched his screens carefully. He was an older man with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen many things in his long career. Around him, dozens of young officers stared at their computers and checked every reading they could get from the alien vessel. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison sat at the communications desk. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls as she monitored every frequency. Suddenly, her screen lit up with an incoming signal. She turned to the Admiral with wide eyes and said the ship was broadcasting a message on all channels. Harrison nodded slowly and told her to put it through to the main screen. The image that appeared made several officers lean forward in their chairs. The alien looked almost like a reptile with scales that shimmered between green and gold colors. Its eyes were thin vertical slits, and when it opened its mouth, everyone could see rows of sharp teeth that looked like needles. The translation program started working immediately, and the alien's voice filled the command center. It called itself Commander Zethric of the Kaldreth Collective. Its voice was cold and filled with a tone that made it sound like it was talking to small children. Zethric said that Earth had been chosen for something called integration into their protection network. He said humans should feel honored by this. The alien continued speaking and said his people had been watching Earth for some time. He talked about human wars and violence and how humans were destroying their own planet. He said all of this made humanity dangerous to themselves and maybe to others in the galaxy. Then Zethric made his offer. He said the collective would protect Earth, but only if humans surrendered all weapons and disbanded all military forces. He said they would accept Kaldreth governance, and in return the aliens would ensure human survival. He said they would guide humanity toward being more civilized. Then came the threat. Zethric gave Earth 48 hours to surrender unconditionally. If humans refused, he said his people would be forced to neutralize Earth's ability to resist by more aggressive means. The message ended abruptly and the screen went black. For a few seconds, nobody in the command center made a sound. Then someone in the back of the room started laughing. It was a quiet chuckle at first, but within moments the entire room erupted. Officers were laughing so hard that some had tears in their eyes. Lieutenant Jake Murphy was gasping for breath between laughs and asked if the alien really just threatened to neutralize them. Captain Linda Hayes was wiping her eyes and said the aliens actually thought humans were primitive. Admiral Harrison allowed himself to smile broadly. He gave quick orders to contact the Secretary General and told someone to pull up the defensive catalog. He said it was time to show their new friends what humanity had been building for the last few centuries. Morrison asked if they should inform the other defense stations, and Harrison confirmed they should contact all of them. He also asked someone to get Director Alan Pierce from Special Weapons Development on the line. He said it was time to dust off some of their more interesting projects. As the orders went out across secure channels, Harrison looked back at the empty screen where the alien's face had been. He muttered the word protection under his breath and shook his head. He said quietly that the aliens had no idea what they had just walked into. All across planet Earth and throughout the solar system, military installations received the alert. Orbital platforms powered up their systems. Hidden bases on the Moon and Mars went to ready status. Weapons that had been waiting in the darkness of space for decades came online. But there was no panic anywhere. No fear rippled through the ranks of Earth's defenders. Instead, there was something else, anticipation, excitement even. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for this exact moment. Ever since humans had left Earth and begun building colonies on other worlds, they had assumed first contact would not be friendly. They had prepared for war since before most of the current generation was born. Every ship built had weapons. Every station had defenses. Every colony could become a fortress if needed. The Kaldreth had made their first mistake when they entered Earth's solar system without permission. Their second mistake was thinking that humans would be afraid of them. Their third and biggest mistake was assuming that a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times and still survived would be easy to intimidate. Humanity had clawed its way up from caves and survived ice ages. They had built civilizations that fell and rose again. They had invented weapons that could destroy their entire world and somehow managed not to use them. They had faced extinction from disease, from war, from their own inventions, and they were still here. Now an alien species had arrived and offered protection. The very idea was laughable. Humans didn't need protection from the universe. They had been fighting the universe since the day they evolved enough to understand what stars were. Every human alive was descended from survivors. From people who refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. From ancestors who looked at impossible odds and decided to try anyway. Commander Zethric and his Kaldrith collective had no idea what they had just challenged. They had scanned Earth and seen a planet with one species living on it. They had seen ships that stayed close to home. They had seen what looked like a young civilization still learning to walk among the stars. What they had not seen was the truth. They had not seen the weapons platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. They had not detected the stealth ships that had been watching them since they entered the system. They had not understood that every piece of human technology was designed with one purpose first and foremost: survival. Admiral Harrison finished giving his orders and sat back in his chair. He looked out the window at Earth below, that beautiful blue and green world that humans called home. He thought about his own children and grandchildren living down there. He thought about all the billions of people who were just living their lives, unaware that an alien force had just threatened their entire species. He smiled again because he knew something that Commander Zethric did not know. He knew that humanity's response to threats had always been the same throughout history. They adapted, they built, they prepared, and then they showed anyone foolish enough to challenge them exactly why that was a mistake. 20 hours passed after the Kaldrith gave their ultimatum to Earth. The United Earth Assembly called an emergency meeting at their facility on the moon. The chamber was built deep inside the crater called Tycho, and it was completely full. Secretary General Marcus Chen stood at the center podium, facing representatives from every nation and territory that existed on Earth and in space. He was a calm man who spoke with a steady voice that never showed panic. He told the gathered leaders that an alien species had issued an ultimatum and believed humans were primitive and needed protection. He said clearly that he had not called this meeting to discuss surrender, because that option simply did not exist. Instead, they needed to decide how to respond to what he called an insult. The chamber filled with voices as people began talking to each other. Representative Julia Armstrong from the North American Union stood up first. She asked if they had completed analysis of the alien vessel. Chen nodded and brought up a holographic display that appeared above the assembly floor. He called on Director Alan Pierce to explain. Pierce was a thin man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He stepped forward and thanked the Secretary General before beginning his report. He said their scans of the Kaldrith warship revealed technology that was frankly disappointing. Their hull was made of a titanium tungsten alloy, which he said was impressive by standards from hundreds of years ago, but laughably inadequate by current human technology. Their energy shields operated on a rotating frequency that human scientists had cracked within the first hour of observation. Their weapons appeared to be plasma-based and could damage a planet's surface with sustained fire, but they were slow to charge and easy to deflect with proper countermeasures. Representative Carlos Rivera from South America said this meant the aliens had brought a knife to a gunfight. Pierce shook his head and corrected him by saying it was more like bringing a stick to a facility full of nuclear weapons. He explained that humanity could disable the alien ship in under 3 minutes using just standard orbital defense platforms. If they wanted to be creative, he said they had at least 30 different weapon systems that could destroy the aliens in ways they probably never imagined were possible. Chen nodded slowly and said this brought them to the question of how to respond. He said they could simply destroy the ship, but that would tell them nothing about the collective or their territory, or whether more ships might come. Instead, he proposed that they educate the aliens. General Patricia Lewis from the European Alliance asked what he meant by educate. Chen smiled and said they would show the Kaldrith exactly who they were threatening. He said Admiral Harrison had prepared a demonstration and asked the Admiral to brief the assembly. Harrison's face appeared on screens around the chamber. He was broadcasting from the defense station in orbit. He explained that they wanted to respond to the ultimatum with what he called a military parade. They would give Commander Zethric a tour of human capabilities, nothing classified, just publicly available defensive systems. If the aliens still wanted to threaten Earth after seeing what humans had built, then they could discuss more aggressive options. Every representative in the assembly voted yes. 6 hours later, Commander Zethric received Earth's response to his ultimatum. The human on his screen was the older male in the simple suit who identified himself as Secretary General Chen. Zethric noticed the human was smiling in a way that made him feel uncomfortable. Chen thanked the commander for his offer of protection, but said humanity must respectfully decline. He explained that humans did not require protection because they were quite capable of defending themselves. To demonstrate this fact, Chen said they had prepared a small exhibition of defensive capabilities. He called it a courtesy from one species to another. He said he hoped it would help Zethric understand why the ultimatum had been met with such amusement. Zethric felt his scales ripple with anger and confusion. He demanded to know if humans dared to refuse the collective. He said they were mocking Keldrith generosity. Chen replied pleasantly that they were not mocking anything. He said simply that they wanted to ensure the Keldrith had all relevant information before making further decisions. The demonstration would begin in 1 hour, and Chen recommended that Zethric watch carefully. The transmission ended, leaving Zethric staring at a blank screen. His crew members were looking at each other with uncertain expressions. Zethric called to his tactical officer named Rinth and asked what these primitives could possibly show them that would matter. He said humans had barely left their own planet. Rinth clicked his claws nervously on his console and replied that their scans had detected unusual energy signatures throughout the human solar system. He said there were far more than they expected for a species at this developmental stage. Zethric snapped that this was irrelevant and ordered weapons prepared. He said that whatever show the humans put on, the Keldrith would respond with overwhelming force. He said the humans would learn the price of defiance. But even as he gave these orders, a small part of Zethric wondered why the human Secretary General had been smiling. That smile had not been the expression of someone who was afraid. It had not been the smile of someone bluffing or trying to buy time. It had been the smile of someone who knew something important that Zethric did not know. It was the smile of someone who was completely confident. In all his years serving the collective and conquering primitive worlds, Zethric had never seen that kind of smile before. It made something cold settle in his stomach. He ordered his crew to bring all sensors to maximum and to monitor every frequency. He wanted to know everything that happened in the next hour. His science officer reported that they were picking up increased energy readings throughout the system. Ships were moving, but most of them were still hidden by some kind of stealth technology. The officer said that whatever the humans were planning, it involved a lot of power. Zethric settled into his command chair and waited. He told himself that no matter what these primitives showed him, the Keldrith collective was superior. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had faced dozens of species, and all of them had eventually submitted or been destroyed. But that smile kept coming back to his mind. That confident, almost amused smile. Like Chen knew a joke that Zethric did not understand yet. Like the human was waiting to share something that would change everything. Zethric checked his chronometer and watched the time count down. 1 hour until the demonstration began. 1 hour until he would see what had made that human smile. 1 hour until he would learn whether his assumptions about humanity were correct or whether he had made a terrible mistake. The bridge was quiet except for the soft sounds of instruments and the breathing of his crew. Everyone was waiting. The humans had promised to show them something, and Zethric had the growing feeling that whatever they revealed would not be what he expected. He remembered the old Keldrith saying that his commander had taught him years ago. The most dangerous enemy is the one who appears weak but is actually strong. He had never really understood that saying until now. The demonstration began with complete silence. For exactly 60 seconds, nothing happened at all. Commander Zethric watched his tactical display with growing impatience. His scaled fingers drummed against his command chair. Then suddenly the stars around his ship began to move. Tactical Officer Rinth spoke up with a tight voice full of confusion and said he was detecting massive energy signatures appearing all around their position. On the main view screen, points of light were moving toward them from every direction. As they came closer, the lights became ships. First dozens of them appeared, then hundreds. Zethric felt his breath catch in his throat. He whispered that the ships had been cloaked the entire time. The humans had been watching them since the moment they arrived. The human vessels came in every size and shape imaginable. There were sleek interceptors that moved through space like striking snakes. Massive carrier ships appeared that were covered with launch bays for smaller craft. Destroyer-class vessels materialized that seemed to absorb light itself into their dark hulls. Station platforms came out of nowhere with their weapon arrays already tracking the Keldrith ship with mechanical precision. A new transmission came through, and this time it was Admiral Harrison. The older human officer appeared on screen wearing his uniform and looking completely professional. He said good afternoon to Commander Zethric in a tone that was polite, but had steel underneath it. Harrison explained that what Zethric was seeing now was approximately 15% of the solar defense fleet. These vessels represented what humans called third-generation military technology, and most of it was over 30 years old. Harrison said they kept these ships as a patrol force because they had better options available. Then he asked if Zethric would like to see something newer. Without waiting for an answer, 3 vessels appeared that made Zethric's blood run cold. They were smaller than his flagship, but their hulls shimmered with an energy he had never encountered before. They did not reflect light the way normal matter should. Instead, they seemed to bend it in ways that hurt to look at directly. Harrison explained that these were Phantom-class stealth frigates. They used something called quantum displacement fields to exist slightly out of phase with normal space. Human sensors could barely track them, and Kaldrith sensors could not track them at all, because technically the ships were not entirely present in normal reality. Each one carried enough firepower to reduce the Kaldrith ship to atoms in approximately 8 seconds. Zethric could feel his crew's eyes on him. He fought hard to keep his expression neutral and calm. Harrison continued speaking and said that perhaps Zethric was more interested in defensive capabilities rather than offensive ones. A massive structure appeared on the view screen hovering near Earth's moon. It was shaped like a geometric impossibility, a station that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that defied everything Zethric understood about physics and engineering. Harrison called it Fortress Prime and said it was one of 17 planetary defense platforms that protected Earth. It generated a shield envelope that could cover an entire hemisphere of the planet. They had tested it against asteroid impacts, against stellar radiation, and against simulated weapons fire equivalent to a supernova. Harrison said it had never failed, not even once in all the tests they had conducted over decades. The demonstration continued for another full hour. Humanity revealed weapon systems that could manipulate gravity itself and create localized singularities. They showed devices that could fold space to redirect enemy attacks back at whoever fired them. They displayed automated defense drones that could replicate themselves using raw asteroid materials. They showed antimatter warheads and quantum torpedoes in something Harrison called a stellar disruptor that he politely declined to fully explain. Harrison noted that humans had developed most of these systems during their expansion into their solar system. When you spend decades mining asteroids and building habitats on hostile worlds and trying to survive in the vacuum of space, you learn to build things that last. You build things that can protect you from anything the universe throws at you, including uninvited guests. Finally, the transmission showed something that made even Zethric's disciplined crew gasp out loud. It was a ship unlike anything they had seen in the entire demonstration. Where other vessels were clearly mechanical constructions, this one seemed almost alive. It pulsed with energy, and space around it rippled like water. Harrison spoke quietly now and said this was the Endeavor. It was humanity's first 5th-generation Explorer-class vessel. It used a propulsion system based on controlled quantum entanglement. It could cross distances that would take the Kaldrith ship months to travel in a matter of hours. Harrison added that humans had 7 more of these ships under construction right now. The Admiral leaned forward on the screen and his expression became hard. He said he wanted to be very clear about something important. Everything he had shown today was documented in public military databases. Any civilian human with a decent education could look up these specifications and read about them. Harrison had not shown anything classified. He had not revealed actual cutting-edge technology. He had not discussed black-budget projects or experimental weapons divisions. Harrison paused and let that information sink in. He said that when Zethric offered Earth protection and threatened to neutralize them, he was not dealing with a primitive species afraid of the dark. He was threatening the descendants of survivors, humans who had crawled out of caves and survived ice ages and built civilizations from nothing and reached for the stars despite having every reason to give up. Humanity had been at war with itself, with its planet and with the universe for its entire existence. And humans had won every single time. The display shifted to show the Kaldrith ship now completely surrounded by human vessels. Hundreds of weapons were locked onto Zethric's position, though none of them had powered up to fire. Harrison spoke softly now and said that Zethric had offered Earth protection. He said that humans were actually the ones that the galaxy should be worried about. Then Harrison said he would give the Kaldrith the same 48 hours that they had given Earth. He told Zethric to use that time to return to his collective and deliver a message. Earth was not interested in protection. Humans were not interested in governance by others. They were perfectly happy to be left alone. But if the Kaldreth insisted on being neighbors, then they could discuss mutual respect between equals. However, force would be met with force. Harrison promised that Zethric did not want to see what humanity looked like when they stopped being polite. The transmission ended. On the Kaldreth bridge, nobody spoke. Zethric stared at the tactical display showing hundreds of human vessels in perfect formation around his ship. Any single one of them could destroy him. Together, they represented power on a scale the collective had rarely encountered in all their centuries of expansion. Zethric finally spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He told his helmsman to prepare for hyperspace jump. He ordered navigation to plot a course back to collective space immediately. Rinth asked carefully if they should inform the collective of this development.Zethric's laugh was bitter and harsh. He said yes, they would inform them. He said that every species in this entire sector would probably want to hear about this. The humans were not primitive at all. They were patient. And Zethric was beginning to realize that patience might be far more dangerous than aggression. A species that rushed to conquer made mistakes. A species that waited and prepared and built in secret was a different kind of threat entirely. As his ship began to power up for departure, Zethric took one last look at the human fleet surrounding him. Not one ship had fired. Not one weapon had been discharged. The humans had simply shown him the truth and let him make his own decision. That was somehow more terrifying than if they had attacked. The Kaldreth Collective Council gathered in their grand chamber on the capital world of Kaldros Prime. The room was circular with elevated platforms for each of the 7 high commanders who governed their vast empire. At the center of the chamber stood Commander Zethric, looking much less confident than when he had departed for Earth 2 weeks earlier. High Commander Vexnor was the eldest member of the council. Her scales had faded to pale gray with age, but her eyes remained sharp and calculating. She leaned forward on her platform and spoke. She said the council had reviewedZethric's report and found it difficult to accept. Zethric replied that he assured her every word was accurate. He had included all sensor logs, visual recordings, and tactical analysis. The humans possessed military capabilities that exceeded Kaldreth technology in several key areas. High Commander Torsk was known throughout the collective for his aggressive stance on expansion. He slammed a clawed hand on his console and said this was absurd. The humans were a single-system species who had not even established colonies beyond their own star. How could they possibly threaten the collective? Zethric answered carefully. He said it was because humans had spent 2 centuries preparing for the worst. While the Kaldreth had been expanding across the galaxy and meeting minimal resistance from species who feared their strength, humanity had been doing something different. They had been fortifying. Every weapon system they showed him was designed not for conquest, but for survival. They had turned their entire solar system into a fortress that would be nearly impossible to attack successfully. High Commander Lyra served as the Council's chief strategist. She brought up a holographic display of Earth's solar system and began analyzing the data Zethric had provided. She said the human defensive network was remarkable in its design. Redundant systems, overlapping fields of fire, automated responses that required no organic operators. The humans had even weaponized their asteroid belt. Any invasion force would face catastrophic losses before even reaching their homeworld. Torsk argued that this was exactly why they must crush humanity now, before the humans expanded beyond their system and became a true threat to collective territory. Zethric interrupted respectfully and said he did not believe the collective could crush them, not without losses that would make any victory meaningless. The admiral who conducted the demonstration had made it very clear that everything shown was outdated technology. Current human capabilities remained unknown, and Zethric suspected they were even more formidable than what he had witnessed. Vexnor raised a hand for silence. She said they needed to consider the situation objectively. They had 3 options available. First, they could attack with overwhelming force. Second, they could attempt diplomatic relations as equals. Third, they could simply avoid human territory entirely. She asked Zethric for his recommendation based on his experience. Zethric took a moment to compose his thoughts carefully. He said that while in human space, he had spent time studying them. He had accessed what they called the Internet, a vast information network that was freely available to anyone who cared to look. What he found had troubled him deeply. He activated his own display and showed images of Earth's history. Humanity's entire existence had been one of continuous conflict. They had fought wars for thousands of years over territory, resources, ideas, and beliefs. They had developed thousands of different ways to kill each other, and they had become very efficient at it. But here was what mattered to the collective. Every time humans faced an existential threat, they united. Every time someone tried to conquer them, they did not surrender. They adapted, they evolved, and they ultimately prevailed against every challenge. The images shifted to show human military history through the ages. Ancient battles with swords and spears, medieval sieges with primitive machines, modern warfare with tanks and aircraft. Zethric continued explaining that humans had sayings that revealed their philosophy. Peace through superior firepower. Walk softly and carry a big stick. They understood that kindness required the capability for violence and that mercy was only meaningful when you could choose otherwise. Torsk stated that this meant humans were aggressive by nature. Zethric corrected him immediately and said no, it meant they were survivors who had learned to be dangerous when necessary. There was an important difference. The humans had not threatened the Kaldrith. They had not chased his ship from their system. They had simply demonstrated that attacking them would be costly and foolish. That was not aggression. That was wisdom born from hard experience. High Commander Sarath had remained quiet until now but finally spoke up. She said she had been reviewing reports from their intelligence network. There were stories about Earth circulating among other species. The Zinthiri had encountered a human exploration vessel the previous year. When the Zinthiri attempted to board the ship and claim it under salvage rights, the humans fought back with such ferocity that the Zinthiri lost 3 ships, while the humans lost nothing. Torsk dismissed this as anecdotal evidence that proved nothing. Sarath acknowledged this but said there was more. The Morphean Syndicate had tried to establish a raiding base in the outer reaches of the human solar system 5 years ago. The entire base disappeared without a trace. No distress call, no survivors, nothing at all remained. Collective intelligence suggested it was humanity's doing, but the humans never claimed responsibility. They had simply erased the problem as if it never existed. Vexnor studied all the assembled data with calculating eyes. She said it seemed they had severely underestimated this species. The question now was whether humanity represented an opportunity or a threat to the collective. Lyra suggested that humans could be valuable allies. If their technology was as advanced as Zethric reported, a partnership could benefit both species greatly. Torsk countered that humans could also be competition. Today they fortified one system, but tomorrow they might expand. In a century, they could rival the collective itself in power and influence. Vexnor made her decision. She said they should learn from humanity, not as conquerors but as students. Zethric would return to Earth, but this time not with an ultimatum. He would bring an apology and a proposal. The collective would offer genuine diplomatic relations, including trade, cultural exchange, and possibly mutual defense agreements in the future. They would treat humans as equals because that was clearly what they were. Torsk's scales flushed dark with anger. He said this set a dangerous precedent, and that showing weakness would encourage other species to challenge the collective. Vexnor cut him off sharply. She said it was not weakness to recognize strength in others. The collective had endured for millennia because they knew when to fight and when to negotiate. Humanity had made it clear that fighting them would be extremely costly. Therefore, they would negotiate instead. She turned back to Zethric and asked if he believed humans could be reasoned with. Zethric thought back to Admiral Harrison's measured tone and Secretary General Chen's diplomatic approach. He said yes, he believed they could be reasoned with. But the collective must approach them with genuine respect. Humans had a very keen sense for deception and condescension. If they treated this as a ploy or a delaying tactic, the humans would see through it immediately. Vexnor ordered him to be genuine then. Return to Earth and tell them the collective acknowledged their sovereignty and wished to establish formal relations. She added, with what might have been humor, that he should try not to insult them this time. Despite the tension, several council members made sounds that approximated laughter. Even Zethric managed a rueful smile. 3 weeks after CommanderZethric's hasty departure from Earth space, he returned with a completely different approach. His ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, well beyond Mars' orbit. Immediately, he broadcast a request for permission to approach, rather than simply demanding entry. Admiral Harrison watched from the defense station as the request came through. He turned to Lieutenant Morrison with an amused expression and asked if they should let the alien back in. Morrison studied her console and reported that the Kaldreth ship was broadcasting on all peaceful frequencies, with no weapons charged and shields at minimum power. Zethric was transmitting what appeared to be a formal diplomatic identifier and following proper protocol exactly. Harrison commented that it was amazing what a little demonstration could do for manners. He granted permission for Zethric to approach, but ordered the Phantom frigates to keep tracking the alien ship just in case. Morrison confirmed that was already done. The journey to Earth took several hours at the carefully controlled speed that Zethric maintained. When his ship finally entered high orbit, it was met not by weapons platforms but by a sleek diplomatic shuttle bearing the insignia of the United Earth Assembly. The shuttle docked with the alien vessel, and Zethric found himself greeting Secretary General Marcus Chen in person for the first time. The human was shorter than Zethric had expected, but there was something in his eyes that commanded immediate respect. Zethric offered the Kaldreth gesture of peaceful intent by showing open palms with claws retracted. He thanked Chen for granting him an audience and said he came with a message from the Collective Council. Chen replied with a slight bow and said they were curious about this message. Last time they spoke, Zethric had been offering protection, and Chen trusted he had reconsidered that position.Zethric's scales shifted to a blue-green color that indicated embarrassment. He said the Collective Council had reviewed his initial approach and determined it had been based on incomplete information and unfortunate assumptions. He was here to offer a formal apology on behalf of the entire Kaldreth Collective. Chen's eyebrows rose in surprise. He said an apology was not what he had expected. Zethric admitted that he had not expected to be delivering one either, but the demonstration had made it very clear that humanity was not a species in need of protection or guidance. The collective wished to propose something entirely different, a genuine diplomatic relationship between equals that could include trade, cultural exchange, and perhaps mutual defense agreements in the future. Chen gestured toward the shuttle's lounge area and suggested they sit and discuss this properly. He said he was curious to hear what had changed the collective's mind so dramatically. Over the next hour, Zethric explained the council's deliberations in detail. He was completely forthright about the debate, about the faction led by Torsk that had wanted to attack, and about High Commander Vexnor's ultimate decision to pursue diplomacy instead. Chen commented that Vexnor sounded wise. Conflict between their species would benefit no one. Humans had no interest in collective territory, and would prefer to focus their efforts on exploration and development rather than war. Zethric ventured to ask a question that had been bothering him. If humans preferred exploration, why had they developed such formidable military capabilities? Chen smiled and gave an answer that revealed much about human nature. He said humanity had learned a hard lesson over centuries of history. The universe does not care about preferences. If you want peace, you must be capable of war. If you want freedom, you must be strong enough to defend it. Humans built weapons not because they loved violence, but because they loved everything that violence could destroy. Chen pulled up a display showing images of Earth through its history. He explained that humanity had nearly destroyed itself several times through nuclear weapons, climate collapse, and resource wars. They had come within minutes of complete extinction more than once. Those experiences had taught humans two critical things. First, that survival required constant preparation. Second, that isolation invited aggression from others. Zethric asked if that was why humans had stayed in their solar system all this time, to avoid conflict with other species. Chen admitted it was partially true, but said there was more to it. Humans had watched other species expand too quickly, colonize without proper planning, and create problems they could not solve. Humanity had decided to master their own system first. They wanted to learn to live in space properly, to build sustainable habitats, and to create the infrastructure needed to support responsible expansion. When humans finally ventured out to the stars, they would do so in a way that did not repeat the mistakes of others. Zethric considered this carefully. He said the collective had expanded quickly throughout the galaxy. They had conquered where they could and absorbed species that could not resist. It had made them powerful, but perhaps it had not made them wise. Chen responded diplomatically and said every species had its own path through history. What mattered now was whether they could walk forward together into the future. They spent the rest of the day negotiating the framework for formal relations between their peoples. It was decided that the collective would establish an embassy on Mars while humanity would send diplomatic representatives to Caldros Prime. Trade agreements would start, small and focus on cultural, goods and information exchange rather than technology or weapons. Both sides would maintain complete sovereignty and their defensive capabilities. Neither would interfere in the internal affairs of the other. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to part ways, Zethric hesitated at the shuttle's airlock. He asked Chen if he could pose a personal question. Chen said of course. Zethric said that when he first arrived and made his demands, the human people had laughed at him. He had been trying to understand why. Was it truly so amusing to be threatened? Chen's expression became thoughtful as he considered how to answer. He said that humanity had a strange relationship with danger. They had faced so many existential threats throughout their history that they had developed a sense of humor about it. When Zethric threatened them, it was not that humans took him lightly. It was that they had been preparing for exactly that scenario for 200 years. Zethric was the test they had been waiting for, and they had passed it. The laughter was a mix of relief, pride, and maybe a little bit of vindication. Zethric asked what he meant by vindication. Chen explained that humans had spent countless resources and entire generations building their defenses. Some people had questioned whether it was necessary and whether they were being paranoid.Zethric's arrival proved they were not being paranoid at all. It proved that the galaxy was indeed a dangerous place and that humans had been right to prepare. So yes, they laughed because sometimes laughter is the only sane response to the absurdity of the universe.Zethric's scales rippled with what might have been approval or understanding. He said that humanity was strange, but he was beginning to comprehend why they had survived when so many other species had not. Chen agreed that humans were stubborn and had a terrible habit of refusing to die when it would be convenient for others. He suspected Zethric would find them frustrating allies. Zethric replied that they would be allies nonetheless. He extended his hand in the human gesture of goodwill, and Chen grasped it firmly. As the shuttle departed andZethric's ship began its journey back to collective space, Admiral Harrison joined Chen in the observation deck. Harrison asked if Chen thought the Caldrith would honor the agreement. Chen replied that he did believe they would. The aliens had learned the same lesson every species eventually learned when they encountered humanity. Harrison asked what lesson that was. Chen said that humans were willing to be friends with anyone but enemies, with no one foolish enough to test them twice. He added that this could be the beginning of something genuinely good. The collective had resources humans needed and knowledge they could learn from. In return, humans could teach the Caldrith that strength was not just about conquest. Harrison nodded and said this was a new era of human history. First contact, diplomatic relations joining the galactic community. Their descendants would read about these days in history books. Chen laughed and said that was assuming humans did not screw it up somehow. Harrison reminded him that screwing things up was what humans did best, but so was fixing their mistakes, adapting to new situations, and surviving against all odds. He said he would take those odds any day. Above Earth, the defense platforms continued their eternal watch over the planet. The Phantom frigates returned to their patrol routes. Throughout the solar system, millions of humans went about their daily lives, and most of them were completely unaware of how close they had come to galactic war. But somewhere in a classified facility deep beneath Earth's surface, scientists were already analyzing the Caldrith ship's energy signatures. They were studying shield frequencies and developing countermeasures for weapons humanity had not even seen yet. Because that was what humans did naturally. They prepared for every possibility. They adapted to every challenge. They survived when survival seemed impossible. And now, with the galaxy finally aware of their existence, they would do something else that came naturally to them. They would thrive a